Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us today in this. This is kind of like the second day of the Open Research Conference, and it's like the fourth session. We will be talking about open research infrastructure, and we have really interesting talks today. So thank you all for joining, and a special thank you goes as well to our speakers today, Hugh, Alex, and Peter. I will introduce them to you shortly. A couple of housekeeping notes. So yes, we are recording the session. If you wish to remain anonymous, you can always switch off your video and change your name. And the way in which we will do the session is we will have the 3 talks first, and then there will be time for question and answers at the end. But feel free to pop any of those questions in the chat as we go through our presentations. So the first talk, I will be delivering this first talk together with my colleague Peter. I am Agustina Martinez. I am part of the university library. I lead the open research systems, and we are responsible for developing the repository and any integrations with those university and external systems that are related to open research. And let me start my presentation now. Yes, so it will be joined with my colleague Peter, our repository manager. And today, I would like to, in the first part, give a brief overview of the Open Research Program, and then I will hand over with a focus on infrastructure, and then I will hand over to Peter, who will tell you a bit more about key systems supporting open research and key upcoming developments in this area. Before getting into detail in terms of open research, I thought it would be useful to give a brief overview of the concept of open research as the practice of sharing as many research outputs as possible. And would like to go very briefly through the key benefits. The first one being about inclusivity and being more inclusive of researchers, especially in those less well-funded institutions or settings. It's also about collaboration and enabling easier and wider collaboration, not only between researchers, but beyond as well. And then a really key important aspect is around transparency and increased reproducibility, which in the end leads on better quality control mechanisms. And the last bit of key benefit is around enabling faster discoveries by removing those barriers around data sharing. And in terms of the role of open research infrastructure, in terms of people, services, and systems, they play a really important part in enabling actually or supporting more open researcher practices there. The library is developing an open research program, a wider one, and the 8 pillars of open research that the League of European Research Universities developed, LERU, is actually the basis of it, so a slightly modified version. I won't go into detail around all of the pillars, but I wanted to highlight here in blue those 3 pillars that are directly related with infrastructure. Future of scholarly communications, very briefly saying that it's about shifting the current academic publishing model towards a more fully open access option, and for these actually systems such as Apollo repository, other publishing platforms.
Hi guys, sorry to interrupt. I don't think we can't see the presentation.
You can't? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Let me see. Sorry about that. Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't hear anything. Sorry about that. Yeah, I went through actually already a couple of the slides. So yeah, I will go. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I was with the pillars finishing. And yeah, I was just mentioning that yeah, they serve the basis of the work at Cambridge around open research. And yeah, so FAIR, I think I was mentioning about the FAIR one, also really important one. It's about findable, accessible, and more interoperable data. And again, systems play a key role there. Infrastructure for research, having suitable infrastructure is key to enable collaboration and more open practices. And for this is really important not only to think about systems, which we tend to, but also include people and services around all of this infrastructure. Brief introduction to infrastructure. In particular, all open research practices rely on a technological infrastructure, and it's important that it enables and encourages seamless or more streamlined open workflows throughout the entire research life cycle. It's important to consider what tools are needed to undertake research openly, and for that, in that area, we have to consider IT solutions, systems integrations, both internal and external, and again, considering people and those services supporting throughout that research life cycle. And then I wanted just to mention briefly the main aim of what I think should be the open research infrastructure about is around meeting researchers' needs in the end across the entire full research life cycle, and by supplying streamlined and better integrated services. In terms of current Cambridge support, there is already quite a good support, and the key areas that I wanted to highlight here are around support with open access publishing and dissemination workflows, and for that Cambridge University Libraries manage Apollo, and we also work very closely with colleagues in the Research Information Office that manage symplectic elements for the submission of open research outputs. Then UIS also play a really important role in managing cloud storage and all of other IT systems relating to open research. And then lastly, but not least importantly, Research Operations Office. They provide great support for researchers around grant management, tools to help finding funding opportunities, and also help in meeting the increasing demands around reporting to funders. In terms of the work we are doing at the library around open research infrastructure, I wanted to mention briefly around governance. The open research infrastructure roadmap and future developments around this area are part of the university's new IT portfolio structure. There is a link there with more information about all of the other portfolios. And in particular, the systems roadmap is part of the research IT portfolio. We've started already work on defining a roadmap for the libraries, and some projects are already taking place and others are underway. And Peter will tell you more about those in the second part of the session. In terms of a bit of background, I wanted to mention a bit about the work we did initially around discovery to inform the future roadmap of systems. We did some discovery work where we looked at existing gaps in service provision and current system infrastructure that we have in Cambridge for support to researchers. This initial work drew on data from, first of all, some work that UIS undertook around compiling a list of strategic IT needs and service requests for schools. And that helped a lot actually in identifying priorities. And those key projects are now part of the infrastructure portfolio that UIS is leading on. And the second second strand of work that helped with this discovery was around the work that the Open Research Infrastructure Group did around existing open research technical landscape with a focus on the areas for research outputs, publishing, and dissemination in particular. Very quickly, around key outcomes of that initial analysis, UIS worked on combining those results of the schools, and in our case, we decided to look at specifically at those that are directly related with open research. So for that, we can group those results into two main categories. The first one is around research dissemination and current gaps in service provision. And then the second big area, and really important one, is around better provision of more integrated research data management services and workflows. And yes, so there are those in the diagram. Those were the key kind of mini themes within those broader categories. In terms of the work of the ORIC group, we looked directly at key systems concerned with managing research outputs. and linking those outputs, more importantly, with grants information and funding information. And then those two systems are the Apollo repository and the CRIS system, research information system, symplectic elements. Peter will tell you a bit more in detail about the integration between those two systems and the direction of travel. But in the end, the key outcome for that was it looked like at the time we had good data workflows already in place, a number of integrations between the CRIS system and Apollo, and we can then provide workflows that allow researchers to manage their publications, link them to funding via the CRIS system, and they can finally deposit those outputs that need to meet the open access requirements. So that workflow is already in place through a single interface, and future work will look more into trying to address actually the user needs around the web interface itself, because we acknowledge that some of those systems can be complex, and even though we have a single interface, the process could be made easier and less complex for researchers. Brief overview of the outcomes. Those two main areas in terms of areas where there are gaps is around integrated research data management services. And I have there a couple of examples around potential projects that we will be looking at. The second one is around better provision of collaboration tools and more importantly, supply real-time access to centrally held data. It would be fantastic is when it comes into researchers, we were able to allow them, give them systems so that they only need to enter information once, and that information is reused and useful across the various systems within the university. And yeah, there are just two examples there around future projects, and I won't go into detail. Peter will tell you a bit more about the electronic research notebooks and researcher profiles. Just want to kind of finalize a bit with the notion of the research life cycle that I introduced in the first slide. If we look at the research, the full life cycle, I have a simplified version here with 4 main stages. We can see actually that current provision is already well advanced, and there is a range of services already in place supporting researchers throughout their projects, but they are kind of quite disjoint from the perspective of the researcher. We work with very many different teams, and different teams provide different services, and sometimes it's not obvious for researchers where the support available is. But overall, yeah, we have actually quite a lot of services supporting the main areas of research life cycle. And then I just wanted to finalize a bit back again to the main aim that I introduced in the first slide, which is around infrastructure should be about meeting researchers' needs across the full research life cycle by supplying streamlined and better integrated services. The vision for infrastructure should be about having current systems that are interoperable, encourage use and reuse of data across the university. And more importantly, we are working towards a more unified view for researchers, where we have better connected systems and information flows across the entire research life cycle. And in the end, it's about reducing that administrative burden that we are placing on researchers so they can focus on what really matters to them, which is about undertaking research and making an impact. And then I will like to hand over to Peter, who will tell you more about some of the current systems we have at Cambridge around open research.
Right, thank you. Let me just try and seize control. Hold on.
Yeah, you should be there now, hopefully, not too much delay.
Okay. Okay, let's get back one. Okay, I jumped ahead to, unfortunately, 2 slides, but there are 2 main, in terms of the open research infrastructure at Cambridge, from our perspective, there are 2 main parts, symplectic elements and Apollo. So Ag has outlined the kind of open research context at the university, but I'm going to give like an outline in terms of the systems that underpin that open research deposit and dissemination practice. So Apollo is run by the University Library. It was established in 2003 as a service for storing and providing access to outputs of Cambridge researchers. So it's been refocused a couple of times, but now it really consists of content with varying types of access, for example, immediate or deferred open access. And its primary focus now is on providing access to the university's research outputs, mainly publications and associated data sets, and also doctoral theses. It's one of the largest institutional repositories of its type in the world, and has more than 260,000 repository items. It used to be called DSpace at Cambridge, so you may occasionally see references to that in kind of like older kind of parts of the web sites. But if you see DSpace at Cambridge, just think Apollo. Symplectic Elements is owned and operated by the Research Information Office. So it's Cambridge's CRIS, or Current Research Information System. It holds information about researchers at Cambridge and the university's research outputs, and the data and the insights that it provides on the publications and on researcher behavior informs large parts of the university. So it's not owned by the university library, because we're only really interested in the deposit part of that process. So Symplectic Elements is really a large network of linked metadata on people, publication, and grants. And the data within it is enriched from external sources. So publications, for example, might be enriched with data from World of Science, Scopus, PubMed Central, but also grants information comes from external grants information systems and internal systems. Not shown here yet is Zendesk. Every deposit via Symplectic is appraised by the Office of Scholarly Communication, Open Access and Research Data Management teams. So there's around 4,000 of those a year, and that generates around 6,500 items of work that needs doing. So as you can imagine, organizing and managing that is quite an extensive process. So we need a very robust system to actually enable us to support our researchers, i.e. you, in terms of your open access submissions and open access and research data related queries. Okay. So taking an Apollo-centric view of things, Apollo and Elements now have a two-way flow. One sec. Two-way flow. I've gone ahead of myself here. So deposit is primarily, sorry, the animation's gone crazy and out of control. So currently, the main route to deposit into Apollo is via Elements. So those two systems form the nucleus of open research infrastructure at the university, but there are other connected systems, both internal and external. Every qualifying research output deposited into Apollo via Symplectic receives a persistent identifier in the form of a DOI. So we currently have minted around 76,000 DOIs with increasingly rich metadata or descriptive information. The DataCite, so the metadata that we provide to DataCite also is exposed via them, which is a kind of central tenet of the open research, open access kind of agenda, is that information about an object, as well as the object's full text, should be exposed as widely as possible, because that enhances discovery and is therefore likely to lead to reuse of something. Where researchers have enabled that aspect in Elements, the DataCite will include their ORCID persistent identifier. So that's a personal identifier that each researcher can own. So if you enable that part of Elements, that means that a research output can be definitively identified as being connected to you. Also here is ResearchFish. This is a web-based platform used by UKRI and many other funders in the UK. It fundamentally collects outcomes from award holders. So research outputs, because of our connection, research outputs entered into Elements and deposited into Apollo will automatically be linked to ResearchFish. And research data sets available in Apollo can also be imported to ResearchFish, provided they have DataCite DOIs. just see. Sorry, there's a slight delay in. Okay, so shown here, Core is a content aggregator. It originated at the Open University. It's now run by JISC, so it's centrally funded by the UK. So in this aspect, Apollo is effectively a publisher to Core. So Core will come and crawl the content of Apollo, and it will automatically index any open access material it can find there. We also report usage statistics to Iris UK, and Iris UK takes those raw statistics and provides counter-conformant statistics, which allow us to keep an eye on or allows us to provide a good, consistent view of how material has been used. So counter statistics are designed to provide a human-focused view on how something has been used. So it strips out kind of robots, strips out indexing tools, and tries to take into account human behavior, such as accidentally double clicking on the same source twice in a kind of short time scale. So each Apollo item also displays the metric, and in the future the dimensions badge, which kind of really shows the reach of the repository content. So the alt metric obviously allows you to track the influence of the Cambridge outputs in areas such as public policy, media generated attention, and social networks. Okay, what's happened here? That's gone crazy. Okay, sorry. All right. So currently, so just to summarize, so currently these three systems, Elements, Apollo, and Zendesk, are all separate, but large parts of them have been redeveloped by the Open Research Systems teams to allow closer integration that's necessary to support our open research practice. So currently there's a one-way flow between Elements and Apollo, but we're just in the process of upgrading the connector, so there will be a two-way flow. So what that means is there are certain categories of material that deposit directly into Apollo. So currently, with the one-way flow, those are not reflected in researcher profiles in Elements, but with the repository tools 2 connector, every piece of material deposited, whether it be Apollo or Elements, will be accessible to the researcher profile in Elements, which will vastly enhance the discovery. It's also better because we have increased control over how we selectively enhance symplectic records with richer descriptive information culled from external sources. So the upgrade to this connector has basically involved a complex mapping exercise between the elements of information available in Elements and in Apollo, and translating between the two to provide a consistent view. So currently more than 55,000 publications have been deposited into Apollo via Elements. So Elements really supports the kind of core open access or open research types, but it does also have some support for other kind of less well-used types, such as presentations, posters, etc. So part of our redevelopment has been improving how those will be displayed and how the information that Elements collects on those data types, so that we hope that will lead to an increased uptake and those in those deposit of those types of material. So this Zendesk help desk system is central to help manage submissions and APCs and helps interaction with researchers. So therefore it's important that it's integrated with this with the repository and with Symplectic. So we've developed an Apollo service that generates tickets into Zendesk whenever there's a new deposit, and also updates the open access and research data teams whenever there are important updates to material. So as well as those benefits, this new connector will allow us to make faster updates with richer metadata, gives us better control over publications, metadata coming from external data sources, and really allow Elements to have access to all Apollo content. which will greatly enhance the individual researcher profiles. I'll go forward one again. So after integration, one of our key concerns about our open research approach is, where possible, to enhance the user experience by reducing friction between systems. So after this we finished integrating, we will no longer have to worry about the deposit route, that they will all be treated equally regardless of the access route, and researcher profiles in Symplectic will be far more complete and provide a richer aspect. Forward on again. So in terms of upcoming developments, Plan S is something we're very concerned with. So Plan S defines a series of principles by which research funded by Correlation S members must be made available open access. So as Correlation S includes UKRI, it's something to which we pay very close attention. So one of the routes for complying with Plan S involves depositing either the accepted or final version of a research article in an institutional repository like Apollo. So our role really involved ensuring that Apollo repository and the connected open research systems meet the core technical requirements of Plan S, so that researchers such as yourselves can deposit research outputs in confidence. So Apollo currently meets the mandatory requirements of Plan S, but we continue to evaluate the other additional strongly recommended additional criteria to see whether that would improve the research landscape. Okay. As you probably know, there's a new UKRI open access policy on the horizon. So this applies to publications which need to acknowledge funding from UKRI or any of its councils. So this open access policy has an increased focus on forms of books and book chapters, and in its current form has some technical requirements that diverge slightly from Plan S. So we're currently helping UKRI to consult on those requirements, because UKRI is a signatory, so we want to make sure that the two are aligned where possible. In terms of next steps, Agostina mentioned the Ern Project. So a project group has been set up to propose a discovery phase leading towards institutional implementation of a small portfolio of electronic research notebook solutions. So the project is going to look into what researchers need from ERNs, and will map those requirements that are currently available ERN products, taking into account key essential criteria present for successful uptake and continued use by researchers and students. So ERNs are the strongest aspect of ERNs from our perspective, is that they support digital documentation of research, such as research methods, observations, experiments, equipment, materials, and so on. So their use by researchers and students is a potentially strong contributor to good research data management practice, especially addressing aspects such as data organization, security and preservation. So the use is also good research practice in general, and they're a very good source for information that can be called upon to demonstrate research integrity if required. They're also a fundamental part of open research. Being digital objects, they're inherently shareable, which promotes research openness and transparency and supports the reuse and reproducibility of research findings. We currently have one repository, Apollo. That's not to say that having one general purpose repository will support our open research practices going forwards. So in a new year, we're embarking on a large scale repository landscape review, and we'll have to decide in consultation with researchers which is the best infrastructure shape that meets your needs. We've also been spending the last year or two undertaking Cortisol Certification. So Cortisol Seal it's a seal of quality to designate what is a trusted data repository. So that's not to say Apollo is not trusted already, it is, but this is a kind of formal recognition of that. it's very handy, it's very useful for researchers because quite often commercial and local authority partners require that data arising from those projects must be deposited in a repository that has this certification. So when we have that award, that will make it easier to demonstrate to research partners that you can deposit your data in a trusted repository. We've been supported by FAIRS Fair, which is a Horizon 2020 funded project. So there was a recognition that there was limited uptake of Cortisol Certification in institutional repositories that were kind of more general purpose in aspects. So the concern was to understand whether the Cortisol seal met the requirements of digital repositories in that sector, which is a kind of very large population of repositories. So we're in the process of finalising our application, and we hope to achieve that soon. So that's all from me. If you do need to contact us about anything we've said so far, other than the questions that you're welcome to provide, is the Open Research Systems team and the service details for the open access team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Let me go back to Zoom. And yeah, I would like now to introduce Dr. Alexandra Freeman, who will be our next speaker. She joined Cambridge University towards the end of 2016 after a career in science documentary making, and quickly became concerned about the research culture and more so about the way the scientific publishing system was driving incentives for researchers. So today she will be talking about Octopus, a new platform. So over to you, Alex.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping you can see my slides. And I first of all want to apologise for my very croaky voice. I've had that terrible cold that's been going around, so huge apologies, and if I have a coughing fit, I'll put myself on mute. The other thing is my computer does occasionally decide to do a restart in the middle of a presentation, so if that happens and I disappear, I will be on my way back. But apart from that, hopefully I'm going to talk to you today about Octopus, which, as Agustina says, is a project that I came up with in about 2017, but is now getting to the point where we're about to launch next spring with backing from UKRI and in partnership with JISC and the UK Reproducibility Network. The Twitter handle is there, and the URL for the prototype version, which I'm going to show you a bit of today, and I'll put it in the chat as well afterwards, because it would be great to get your feedback if you've got time to try it out. So Octopus, I'm going to be coming from the perspective of somebody who works within STEM disciplines, but I have heard from an increasing number of people that perhaps I'm thinking too narrowly, and Octopus may have uses outside of the STEM disciplines as well. So again, I'd be really keen to hear if you're from an arts and humanities background about what you think about this. So you probably don't need me to outline some of the issues with the current publishing system, but here are a few of the things that really struck me when I rejoined academia and came to Cambridge. It takes too long to publish anything, and we've seen this, especially during the COVID crisis, how much that's driven the uptake of preprints in some areas, because they've basically been filling a gap where journals were too slow. But I don't see that COVID should be anything special. I mean, any healthcare advance, any scientific advance is urgent from the people that might benefit from it. So we want to get stuff out there. And then there's no good guides to quality. We use really poor proxy metrics for quality of research. And again, that's been brought out during the COVID crisis, where we've had concerns raised about the quality of some work published in journals of all levels of perceived quality of journal. There are problems of reproducibility, and we know about this, but it's beyond just the reproducibility of the research itself. There's what gets published in the first place, and how detailed the methods and the analyses and the data are that get shared. And a lot of that is down to the way that we traditionally publish research. And then, of course, there's all the questionable research practices that help your work get published, that help results fit a hypothesis. So I won't go into all of these in detail, of course, you know them, but I'll come back to them where I think Octopus is relevant to them. And then there's problems with finding anything. I mean, there's so much out there that it's really difficult to find and access the relevant work. And a lot of these problems then have a knock-on effect on the research culture. There's a hierarchical structure that's based on the inequalities of access to this sort of one single measure of success, the high impact publication that does tend to get used. And I think that leads to the potential for more junior researchers to feel bullied into questionable research practices and losing some of the sense of fulfillment and control over their careers in the face of the system. And I think a lot of these problems stem from just one principal issue, which is that journals are being pulled in two different directions. They're doing two different things at once. One job is, and it's a really important one, disseminating useful findings to practitioners and researchers. And it's the one that we probably mostly think about. It's the aim for things to be attractive and readable. The popular bits of journals, really, the news, the views, the editorials. But this can drive things like word counts and publication bias and a lot of the questionable research practices. And at the same time, they're almost kind of being forced to fulfill another job, a rather thankless task of being a kind of patent office for establishing priority, a place to record full details of methods and data, which is a really specialized kind of communication. It's actually what I study in my research group in Cambridge, which is the evidence communication, which is different from communication when you're trying to persuade people or you're trying to make it short and engaging and really just lead people to a take-home message. The communication of evidence itself, where you're only trying to inform people and you're trying to give people everything you did in full detail so they can make up their own mind, and you don't have a take-home message, is really different kind of communication. And I think it's naturally being sacrificed towards the dissemination task of journals. And they've both got really different kind of incentive structures. And if journal publications are being used as the main record and the main platform for which researchers' work is being judged, then what we're using as criteria of quality turn into judging quality on how good you are at disseminating findings, rather than how good your primary research really is. So what can we do? Well, I think the answer is to split these two jobs. And that's what Octopus is. It's designed to be the new primary research record, to take on that second job and leave journals free to do the first one properly. And then we don't have the incentives of good dissemination bending the incentives of good research. So Octopus is first and foremost designed to maximize access to primary research. So of course, it's free to read and free to write, but it's also designed to set a new incentive structure to support good research. And I think that one of the keys to that is breaking up the concept of the paper as the main unit of publication, which it certainly is in science. The scientific process, or perhaps the research process, naturally comes in a series of steps, one after the other, and each one requires quite different skills and resources, and forcing people to get right to the end of this process before sharing any of it is causing, I think, a lot of problems, because you're retrospectively forcing a linear narrative. You're only able to publish when data supports the hypothesis, and you're trying to tell a good readable story, whilst the process actually isn't like that. And in a primary research record free of those dissemination incentives, we can allow a structure of publication that more closely matches the actual process. Each publication type linked to the one before it in the chain. So each of these is a publication in its own right. So this is the structure within Octopus. If you're familiar with registered reports as a publication type, it's a bit like taking that concept to its ultimate conclusion. In registered reports, you submit to a journal for publication once you've got to the protocol stage and you have peer review and in-principle acceptance. In Octopus, you would publish actually every individual part of the process. And you wouldn't need to complete all of them before you can publish any of it. You wouldn't need to complete all of them at all. You can concentrate on what you yourself specialize in. The observant of you might have noticed there are 7 types of publication on the screen. The 8th type in Octopus is a review, a peer review. So a review can be published attached to any other kind of publication, and they're treated and valued as in the same way as all the other publication types, because reviewing is a scientific skill or a research skill, just like any other. And by incentivizing it, we can encourage good reviewing. So this is what the Octopus prototype looks like at the moment. Across the top there, you've got that branching structure of linked publications. And every publication, as I said, has to be linked to an existing one. So we don't just get a soup of stuff. And so that helps navigation and discovery, as does this rating system here on the right-hand side. This allows well-rated publications to come to the top of searches, but there's more to it than that. This is our way of changing the metrics of publication. And in addition to rating, we have red flagging, which is a way of raising concerns about a publication where you think there is something serious. So instead of having to write to a journal and going through a retraction process, you can raise a flag, you can write what your concerns are. These get sent to the authors, and it could be that they're resolved through reversioning of the publication, keeping the old version for the public record. But it could be that your concerns are possibly they're not serious enough for reversioning, but they're always going to be there on the record for others to read. So it's a kind of review, but it's a way of flagging more serious concerns. But to go back to the rating system, people have concerns that it's a kind of turning a complex thing, a scientific research idea or research data, into something as simple as a kind of TripAdvisor. But I see it instead as a way of bringing our metrics that we're judging research on closer to what we really mean by them, because the rating is on predefined criteria. So it allows us as a community, research community, to decide what good means for each publication type. So I'll come back to that in a minute. I wanted to talk about the benefits that I think this kind of new structure of publications in Octopus would bring. So you've got instant priorities for researchers, so you're not worried about sharing, and you've got faster dissemination of stuff. You've got smaller author groups, so it's a more meritocratic system. It means you get recognition for exactly what you do and credit for what you do. And that can be particularly important for specialists who might end up usually in the middle of a long author chain. And it's accountable. It's clear who's collected the data, who's done the analysis, excuse me. So if there is anything wrong, it's clear where that needs correction. And there's no need for narrative. As I said, I think this is really important, because that pressure for trying to fit data to a hypothesis is behind so many of the questionable research practices, and in fact behind much of the publication bias. And it means you can publish smaller bits of work, meaning that there's far less research that's lying around in people's drawers, not published because it was a small data set, or they only got as far as the hypothesis, or for whatever reason they moved on. And coming back then to that rating system, I think it's crucial for us in telling what's good. It allows us, as I said, to devise this community consensus on what good is. And it creates much more subtle metrics for success for individuals. So we've got this fast rating system, but we also have peer review, which is, of course, is really important. And as I said, in Octopus, it's incentivized by being treated as a publication in its own right. And being able to read other people's critiques of publications, I think, is really important to help people understand the strengths and weaknesses of each publication and learning how to critique the work of others. It's a skill, as I said, like all other research skills. So here you can see, when you write a review, it's treated like any others. It's not a kind of quick comment that you might post in a social media type of way. It requires all the metadata and all the things that you would go through to post any other kind of publication. And I think this is important in many ways. I think post-publication, this kind of open post-publication peer review that you do find in some journals, means that there's less of a hierarchical editor system that can lead to publication bias. And it encourages this more collaborative way of thinking about research. Because people can reversion publications when they've read reviews, and perhaps even include the reviewers as authors on their new versions. It allows us to think about, or encourages us to think about research not as a personal endeavor to try and always be right and to try and complete large areas of research on your own. Instead, each of us is doing our piece, putting our piece of the jigsaw into the bigger picture. And our piece of the jigsaw might well be good critiquing. We're working with the other authors and the other researchers in our community to try and put together this generalized knowledge that is the research base. And it allows others, of course, as I said, to see various different expert perspectives on the work. Why should peer reviews, these really important insights, be hidden from view? I think it's very useful to share them. And I mentioned incentivizing reviewing. They're treated like any other publication. So they're rated. So good reviewing is encouraged, and they are also appear on your kind of CV on Octopus. And that's really important. It means that it produces these much more sort of useful set of metrics for institutions and funders. This is my page on the Octopus Prototype. As you can see, I'm an incredibly prolific author on the Octopus Prototype, as you'd expect. But I'm also, you can see the balance of the different types of publication that each person is writing. So you can see what type of researcher they are. Are they a data collector? Are they an analyst? Are they an ideas person? Are they a big collaborative writer? So they're writing a lot of useful and well rated critiques and reviews. And you can see all my conflicts of interest there on the left-hand side as well. So having these more useful metrics, I hope it provides an incentive for researchers to get their work into Octopus quickly and in the best form possible, because of course these metrics are then useful, as I said, for institutions and for funders. So Octopus, as I say, won't be a good read. That's where journals then take over in the dissemination process. It's a lot of smaller publications linked to each other in a complex structure. But I think journals can then take the best content, or the content that best suits their use for their readers from Octopus, and editorialize it for their particular readership and their community, which is an important thing. So there are benefits to the Octopus structure, I think, for each part of the research community. For researchers, I hope that it would remove barriers to access worldwide. And there are various things within Octopus, as well as being open source, open access. It's also trying to remove barriers such as language. So I'm hoping to build in automatic language translation so that you read and write in your native language, regardless of everybody else's native language. It gives instant priority. It's easy to publish. It's quick to publish, and it's easier to find relevant work. And as I said, it's more meritocratic. For institutions, I'm hoping that it allows them to instantly assess what type of researcher each person is, who they might be considering for hiring or promotion. And it's a much better way to see what their peers think of them, because you've got these reviews of each of their parts of their work, and you've got ratings, which makes it a quick metric-centric version as well. For funders, I think it could really change the way that funders approach funding research, because not only could they search for well-rated publications and offer funding maybe for the next part of the chain, they could then say, you know, here's a well-rated protocol. I'm going to offer funding for multiple groups. They could raise a sort of gold flag against things. And that would allow them to avoid all this wasteful grant application process and really change the way that we think about funding. It could be available in smaller pots, potentially even from research groups as well. Maybe they don't have somebody within the research group who's qualified to do the analysis required for the types of data that they're collecting. Maybe they want to offer funding for an analyst to come and analyze the data. And for journals, originally, I have to admit, I thought that Octopus would be an alternative to journals, you know, it would replace journals. But actually, as I now say, I see it as splitting the role. So I think journals can become more focused on synthesizing and editorializing research content and then disseminating it to their audiences, which I think is, as I said, is an equally important part of the research sharing chain, but very different. So hopefully there's benefits for everybody in the Octopus system, but what's difficult is that we all have to move to it in kind of one go. So what I think is that at this moment, because we work up to the spring launch, we all need to commit to moving to Octopus quite quickly, and that's the challenge. So I'm really keen to hear from any of you about your questions about Octopus when we get to the end of today's session. And also, as I said, if you could try it out and give feedback on the site, that would be great. Thank you to the funders and partners of Octopus who are helping us get to that important launch point. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Alex. That was fantastic. And it really looks like, you know, Octopus, the future has a key role in trying to remove those barriers that we have at the moment in terms of open research and increasing collaboration, in particular reproducibility. So yeah, thanks a lot for your talk. Our next speaker today, it's Hugh Jones. Hugh is the head of the Digital Library Unit and the Digital Humanities Coordinator at Cambridge University Library. He works with researchers, curators, and technical staff to make special collections accessible online. And today he will be talking about Cambridge Digital Library. So Hugh, over to you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Oops, that's a preview of later on in the talk. There we go. Hi, yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to talk. I'm going to talk about the digital library, which I am the head of, and I suppose its relationship to research. The digital library has been going for 10 years this month, so it's quite a good time to reflect on 10 years of I suppose, partnering with research, publishing research through digital library platforms, specifically digital humanities research. And I suppose what I'm going to talk about mainly centers on openness in research, making things available. And I'm going to talk specifically about Cambridge Digital Library, but I think it will be applicable to digital libraries generally. I have to say I'm very jealous, Alex, of your octopus icon. And I think that the digital library should have a mascot where it can have an equally cute little icon, which we can use to publicize our activities. So yeah, so Cambridge Digital Library, I suppose, was set up in the first instance to solve a specific problem, which was that every research project which the library partnered with had its own little website, and those websites were difficult to maintain and inevitably kind of disappeared after a while. As I said, we've been going for 10 years. We have 81 collections on digital library, each one of them representing some kind of research activity, I suppose. I think it's fair to say that probably 3/4 of those would not exist anymore without a kind of unified infrastructure for presenting the research. If we had 81 sites, then experience tells us that 3 or 4 years after the end of funding projects, those sites start to disappear and all of that valuable stuff is kind of wasted. It's encouraging to note that the first two collections we put on the digital library, so Isaac Newton's papers and some early Quranic fragments, are both, or each, the subject of current bids or active funding projects. So we are succeeding, I suppose, in our aim of promoting reuse and further research through openness. The other thing I wanted to say at the start is that the partnership with research was always central to Cambridge Digital Library, because our funding model was to digitize through getting research funding, broadly speaking. So over the last 10 years, we've had money from the HRC, JISC, when they used to fund digitization, etc., ERC, ESRC, and then from, I suppose, the kind of philanthropic sector, Wellcome, Mellon, Polonsky, etc. So we always needed to respond to the needs of researchers, and the needs of researchers, I suppose, are also the requirements of funders. So openness, impact, sustainability, and reuse. We used to advertise ourselves to researchers by telling them that we'd write their data management plan for them, which was always and provide sustainability, which they always liked. So that's really, research is kind of built in right at the heart of Cambridge Digital Library, those partnerships. So now just a quick tour of what's available on the digital library. So of course we have archival imaging, we have our famous names, we have Isaac Newton's papers. The first thing to go on the digital library, here's some snowflakes, it's drawn by Isaac Newton. We have Darwin, here's a draft of The Origin of Species on the back of a drawing of what looks like a soldier on a carrot by one of Darwin's children. An interesting example of accidental survival in the archive. We have stuff from all over the world. This is a 17th century printed, it's actually printed, not painted, book from China. And we have modern collections on the digital library as well. Does anybody know where this is? I'll give you 10 seconds to put it in the chat. Some of you will have passed through this place to get today. This is from a collection of aerial photography in the university's collections. Anybody know where it is? Okay, it's yes, Cambridge Station in the 1950s, with this nice little turntable for which is now probably Microsoft Research Center. And we have slightly older photography collections as well. So this is a picture of the Cavendish Laboratory towards the end of the 19th century, with one very interesting feature, which I'm sure you can spot. So I suppose if we started with the idea of doing archival imaging so that researchers could work on collections digitally and produce research about them, we're now moving to a stage where imaging is a research activity in itself. So we have all kinds of investigative imaging processes. This is a palimpsest, the Codex Acinthius. Palimpsest essentially is where you have text on top of earlier text, so the reuse of parchment. You can probably just about see some kind of text underneath the main text here. But if we bombard it with rays, multispectral imaging, then we can read the undertext, and then researchers can produce a transcription. So instead of trying to create things which look like the original, we do things which don't look like the original, but tell you new things about the material which you can't get from the original. And then we also, this is another example, which I might just come out and show you because it's interesting. So this is an oracle bone. I'll just move that across. About 3,000 years old. The library does contain objects, and when we have objects, we have ways of imaging which tell us new things about those objects. So this is a 3D image, but it's a 3D image done in a particular way under raking light, which allows you to see markings not obvious in the original. And this text is a new text which was not visible in the original, and it's now been transcribed by researchers and added to the digital library, their research and the images. So as well as images, we take the research outputs which researchers produce, so one of which is description. So description can be anything from the rather long, as in this example, to the much shorter, as in this example. So this is a bestiary, I should be able to see, from 1230, produced in London, I think. And this is a fragment from the Geniza collection. These two items raised an interesting thing with the digital library, which is that everything in there is the product of somebody's research question. So some research questions go very deeply into single items or small groups of items, some research projects. So some parts of the digital library, I suppose, are deep dives into small amounts of material. Other parts of the digital library are much more like this. I think there are 196,000 Geniza fragments. So we're talking about big data in the ancient world. So obviously you can't do, unless you have thousands of years, you can't do a deep dive into that. You have to treat it like big data. So the data which we hold in the digital library has to be understood in the context of the research which produced it. And with 81 different projects, that makes quite a lot of different research approaches, which is important in reuse of data, which is something I'll come on to in a minute. The same is true of the other textual content we have on the digital library. So we have a lot of transcription, so textual representations of items. This is a transcription of a page from I think 14th century instruction on how to build a piece of astrological equipment. This is early 20th century. It's from Joseph Needham's. Oh no, that's Darwin, actually. Sorry, that's a Darwin letter. So again, we have the whole range, different research projects transcribing for different reasons. And then we get the combination. So we get the images alongside the transcription, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing we do, of course, which is important to researchers and funders, is impact. So we produce things like this. I'll just play the first bit, which go alongside research outputs. This is Simon Schaffer at Newton's birthplace talking about
idea in the 17th century
Newton.
was that there are two kinds of colours, real and imaginary. Real
I'll
colours
just leave him
actually
to play for a minute. I always think that one of the key skills in this is being able to walk purposefully and talk at the same time.
Of our minds. But some natural philosophers began to argue that no, all colours are imaginary. All colours are made the way the rainbow is. So if you could understand the rainbow, you could understand the origin of colour. You can reproduce the effects of the rainbow with glass prisms. So prisms became the chief instrument for investigating the origin of colour.
So just to show, oops, I'll just move that on. Oh, no. The kinds of things that we have on the digital library. I particularly like Simon's kind of heavy metal walk through the library there. Again, an example of somebody walking purposefully on camera. So if we hold all this information, I suppose it's important to think about how people get it, how people interact with it. The most obvious place is through the interface. The interface is deliberately quite simple, so it provides a view onto the content, allows you to search, allows you to see the images, transcription, description, but doesn't really, allow you to get into the data. In terms of making data available, there's I suppose two main ways in which people do it. The first is to make it available through repositories, so that you can go and just grab the whole lot. So this is the repository for Ferrist, which is the digital humanities project we're involved with and this is on GitHub. Also, Apollo is another repository where we advise people or their own institutional repository advise people to put data. Some institutions then put layers over those repositories, such as the Data Foundry, which is data collections from the National Library of Scotland, which puts some context around the data, which, as I said, is very important, because in order to reuse data, you really need to understand why it was created and how, etc. Currently, the digital library, we're moving towards making our stuff available in a more kind of Data Foundry-esque way, but currently everything is available via APIs, which is essentially a kind of programmatic way of accessing data. So if we think about the interface, everything that's available in the interface is also available, and I'll just go through them in computer readable form. So this is everything in a collection. Can I do this? This is we make things available in standard format. So IIIF, the International Image Interoperability Framework for Images, which allows people to iterate through the images in an item and retrieve them programmatically, and retrieve parts of them programmatically, retrieve them at different resolutions, etc. And we also make our base data available, which is in TEI-XML, which is a standard format. So we're quite good at making everything available beyond the interface in ways that people can kind of suck it all up and produce new research out of it. When you do get it, we're very standard, so people should understand what they get. So they'll get TEI-XML, they'll get TIFFs, JPEGs, JPEG 2000s in terms of images. The metadata itself, we encourage people to use standard vocabularies and identifiers, so things like the Virtual International Authority files, thesauruses of geographical names, etc. We have licenses included in all of our data. By default, we're CC by NC, but people can alter those licenses if the terms of their funding or their own interests require. So we are, I mean, it's an interesting thing because we are standard, as in we have standard ways of accessing data, and then we have, when you get it, it's in standard format, so people should be able to understand what they are getting and use it. But that doesn't really solve the problem that, as I keep saying, I suppose, that you, in order to reuse data, you really need to understand both the scope of the data and the data's provenance. And the digital library is an interesting example of this, because essentially the digital library is driven by research funding and research interests. So essentially, rather than people think of the digital library as being a representation of the library's collections in some sense, but it's more a representation of research funding, which the library's been successful in partnering or winning over the last 10 years. So in a sense, it's a better reflection of research preoccupations and trends over the last 10 years than it is about the library's decisions about what it wants to digitize. So it's that in itself is quite interesting and general to most digital libraries, I think, apart from a couple in Scandinavia, which just managed to digitize everything. I'm just going to go in the last part of my talk through a few projects which show the kinds of things which people have done with the data and reuse the data. So we have a project at the moment which is using investigative imaging to look at watermarks in Newton's material. We're using IIIF, the standard format, to take the watermarks in, gather them together, investigative imaging to take the images themselves, and then we're using computer vision techniques to group together pieces of paper sharing the same watermark, and thus hope to establish at least a kind of chronology, if not actual dating of Isaac Newton's works, which lots of people argue about, as you might know. I'll go out for this. We have a computer vision project as well. Oh, if I can move this back down. Go here, which is kind of based on this project where you can take images. This is actually one done from the National Library of Scotland, and grab a part of an image and search for, rather than searching by metadata or text, you actually search for things which look like that. So this is to do with the reuse of the same wood blocks in all kinds of different stories. We have a project which is using linked data with our Islamic manuscripts collection. So producing visualizations like this out of TEI'd records. This is quite an interesting one. It's a bit too big to be comprehensible, but this big blob down here is all of our Islamic manuscripts. And this blob here is a collection of medieval Western manuscripts from Oxford, just a comparatively small one, just to illustrate the point. And then you can see that they're quite separate, except there's a kind of highway between them, which is Avicenna and Aristotle and people like that, as you would expect. So it doesn't really tell you anything which isn't known, but it is a demonstration of you know, that the system works. And if you ask a different question out of these two data sets, you might learn something more interesting about the relationship between Western and Eastern traditions, manuscript traditions. Let's go back. And I think that, yes, and then Casebooks is another project we worked on, which is creating visualizations of the relationships between people in a large 17th century data set. So that's a kind of quick tour of the kinds of things that we have in the digital library, the kinds of things that people are doing with stuff that's in the digital library, and how we've kind of grown, in a sense, further and further over time towards being more and more involved in research directly. And that's where I'll stop.
Well, thank you, Hugh. That was really interesting too. And we have quite a few questions actually. And yes, Alex was mentioning in the chat, like, yeah, we will have a live Q&A now. So yeah, I will post the questions, and then you guys, if you can answer, that would be great. So there's a first question around ERNs, and whether, from Peter, whether there are any recommended approaches to keeping an ERN at the moment. And I think Sasha gave a really useful link in the chat around. There is currently a page maintained by the data team. It has some listing information about key options, key features, and hopefully you find that useful in helping you knowing what's available and what can support the type of research you do as well. Then there are some questions for Alex, one from Eve, about the open peer review elements of Octopus, and whether you've considered providing an option for reviewers to be identifiable via behind the scenes, but to be actually anonymous publicly. And the examples Neve gives is around PhD students, early career researchers wanting to be eager to contribute, but being a bit like, yeah, afraid of public comments. So yeah.
Who to go first? Shall I go first? Yes, this is a really common question. And I think it's a bit of a tragic indictment on the research culture that people are afraid to speak their mind. And what I hope will happen, I don't want to allow anonymous publications, because I think that will undermine the transparency of the whole system. And I think what I hope will happen is that the culture will change relatively rapidly to allow people to feel confident that they are not going to have any adverse outcomes about writing a genuinely good critique of somebody else's work, whoever they are and whoever the other author is. Good reviewing it should be not about the people, it should be about the content and the research and the thought. So I do hope that we can get around that quite quickly, and that good reviews will get well rated, and that people will learn what a good review looks like and feel confident that they can produce one just in the same way they would produce any other publication. I have had a suggestion, which I think is a slightly genius one, which we could move to if the system doesn't work, which is that every publication has a kind of anonymous 6-month embargo period where you can't see who wrote it. And in that time, all ratings could be like golden ratings. And so if you break the embargo on social media, then you lose all your golden opportunity. And that then after 6 months, say, the names appear on them. It would have to be across the board for all publications. I quite like it, but I would like the culture to change such that we didn't need to do that. So I hope it does. And I hope, well, we will launch with no anonymity, and hope that we as a community, as a research community, can make that work. I think it would be sad if we can't.
Thank you, Alexa. Another one for you too, from Lucy. It's about, have you spoken to publishers about Octopus, and do you think they will be willing to republish work that has already been made available? And also, what about journals that don't have a large editorial staff to do the work you envisage?
Yes, I have spoken to quite a lot of publishers at various kind of times and various levels. And it would be quite a big change from how journals currently, or publishers currently, see their role. And I think some see it as everybody realizes that the publication system is changing. And everybody's waiting to see how it's going to change and ready to change with it. Octopus isn't waiting. Octopus is going to change things. And so I'm not in the business of worrying about other people's business models. I think some publishers will change to and adapt to how the landscape changes, and others may not. And that's kind of not my problem. What I think is really important for research and science is that we sort out the incentive structure and the way that the metrics that are used, because science is really, really important. Research is really, really important to society, to culture, to everything. And so it's just too important to worry about anything other than getting it right and getting the incentives right to encourage good research. And I hope that everything else will fit in around getting those incentives right. And Octopus doesn't have any commercial sort of pressures at all. It's a public service funded by UKRI, supported by JISC. So our only worry is getting it right to science.
Thank you. There's a question for Hugh from Nicholas. How was the 3D oracle bone digitized? This is adjacent to a problem that I have.
Hi, Nicholas. So it was photographed using a technique called photogrammetry, which is essentially you put the thing on a kind of turntable and you automate you take many different pictures, and then you have software which pieces them all together into a single 3D image. But the difference with this is that the photogrammetry was done under raking light. So it's an interesting image because it's not, if you look at the real oracle bone, it doesn't look like the image because the text is much more difficult to read. So it's deliberately a manipulated image to bring out the text. So photogrammetry under raking light. We do that. So if you're in Cambridge and you want to pop in and have a look at how we do that, then do feel free.
Thank you. Might take you up on that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Hugh. There is a really good question for Hugh as well from Eve. Do you think there are elements of the Octopus approach that would work well with the types of research that is undertaken at Cadell?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because we're involved in, I really get what Alex said about the problem of when to publish and how often to publish, and not to lose the stage or the stages in the research which are valuable for other people. We're currently coming to the end of a kind of small grant in which we did some digital humanities work on some political speeches, and the problem is that the target is always shifting, isn't it? It's always moving away from you, and you don't. But your one's early efforts, and in a sense, all of the bad things you did and the things you got wrong, are more valuable to people than the final polished thing, which is a bit, you can't really get your claws into it, can you? Because it's too smooth. Whereas what people want is I'm doing this now, and oh God, look, this went wrong, and this is what I think. And I think that it's probably true of all research, but I only have experience with digital humanities research. But a better, a more granular approach to, a more open approach to publishing all of the different stages would be really, really valuable, I think, in our field.
Thank you. And there was another question for Alex from Katie Jones around how would you envisage non-academic users interacting or engaging with Octopus?
It's an interesting one because I guess there are lots of different kinds of non-academic users. Excuse me. In terms of the public and those not undertaking any form of research, I think Octopus will probably be quite dull. Because it's not designed to communicate in that way. And that's where I think sort of translation through journals and through other outputs would be important. But there are lots of other researchers who aren't academics. And I've had a lot of communications, not just from people within industry, but people within sectors that we probably don't think of within academia as doing research. So the Metropolitan Police are really interested because they actually do quite a lot of data analysis. And none of that is shared. And there's quite a lot that they could be sharing, techniques that they use for data analysis and results that they can share publicly as well. So I think there are actually quite a lot of sectors, probably a lot of charitable sectors, a lot of research goes on, where at the moment it ends up in what's kind of called the grey literature, or even not available at all, because actually publishing an academic paper is a massive undertaking. It requires quite specialist skills and has no value whatsoever if you're not an academic. So there's a lot of stuff that's done in the world and not shared. And I think that's really important, that we're losing insights from people doing really diverse and really interesting and important research all over the world. So I really hope that Octopus can support researchers who are not in academic institutions, who are doing valuable things that we can all learn from.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if there are more questions, but I have one for you, Alex. Around the data model underpinning Octopus, actually, is really cool to see together things like hypotheses, the different, small outputs throughout the stages. But I was wondering, what about export and how easy it is to actually export all of that combined structure of different bits put in together, thinking about the challenges for preservation as well of those things.
Yeah, so there's a couple of points there. One is that Octopus isn't trying to replace data repositories. So one thing that I tend to not make clear enough when I'm talking about it is that that it would be working with other places where data is put. So it's not itself a data repository. So if you have a DOI from some data somewhere, or a protocol in protocols.io, or a video or an digital object, any of that, you take the unique identifier or the URL or the DOI and you put that into Octopus, and you put a description around it, of course. So Octopus in itself wouldn't be holding vast amounts of data. Obviously, it'd be holding text kind of data. So that's one thing I should make clear. But I think your question about how you might be able to export stuff from Octopus is one that I am far from an expert on, because I'm not a data sort of manipulator, not a data scientist. I think we have had people sort of asking if, at the moment, you can download stuff, it converts it to a PDF to download it, or you could export it via an API. But we've had people asking, can you kind of create a paper by tagging certain publications in Octopus and then exporting them all as one PDF? Well, yes, we can probably make that a relatively easy functionality, but it's kind of not designed to do that. So yeah, this is where the user testing is really important. So we are constantly running user testing sessions. So if you want to drop me an email and say I'm interested in taking part in that, it'd be really valuable to learn what other researchers in other fields want to do with that export from Octopus, and what they want to do, sort of putting stuff into Octopus as well. So do drop me a line, especially if you're not in a STEM subject, or you're not a researcher whose pathway I probably know, the kind of traditional researchers. So if you're a librarian or working in digital humanities, then it would be great to know how Octopus might work for you and what we'd need to do to make it work with the systems that you work with. So yeah, very valuable. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, there's another question for Alex as well. Is the hope that the longer term support for Octopus would continue through JISC and UKRI, or do you think a point could come where you would need to develop new business models to keep it going?
Yeah, I hate the word business models. People always say, what's your business model? And I feel like I don't have a business model because I don't run a business. But I know that that's a sort of naive way of looking at it. I do think that Octopus is a public service and it should always remain free at the point of use. Obviously, there are some costs associated with it. I consider one of my metrics of success getting those costs as low as possible. Octopus is as automated as it's possible to make, which means that our running costs are really low, and I'm trying to keep them below 100,000 a year. And I think that if we as a research community can't find £100,000 a year to keep a public service running, that would hopefully change, as I say, the whole incentive structure and incentivize good research practice, then, well, I just don't think it's possible that we can't find that. If I can't find it, then I might have to go cap in hand to institutions and say, for the price of essentially one journal on your shelf each year, could you all stump up enough to keep Octopus running? And we are doing our best to provide you with useful metrics and useful sources of data. So I would hope that we can keep it funded and keep it running in the long term. I would never sell it and never let it charge anybody at point of use. So I think those are my fundamental principles, and hopefully there are other people who think alike and we can keep it running.
Cool, thank you. I don't think there are any more questions that I can see. So I just wanted to say, like, once more, a big thank you to all of our speakers today, Hugh, Alex, and Peter, and also to the audience for being here. And I hope you've found the session useful. Another reminder that there are more talks today on various aspects of open research, and hopefully the link to the program goes there on the chat. And I think the next session today is about why publishing open access should be your first choice from CUP from 3 p.m. I think it is. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.